The title of my talk is 5 Deadly Errors Against the Faith. When I originally gave the title, I had suggested 7 deadly errors against the faith, but working it out, I realized I only had time to cover 5. So that's just the way it is. We could actually talk about 10 or 12, I think, pretty easily. But I want to start with the story of our friend Edwin Faust, writer for CFN, and the story that he tells of being in a Jesuit university in Philadelphia in 1967. Now, this is just after the close of the council. A new spirit is coming in, and we're still at the point where people are surprised, stunned, scandalized at what they're hearing. And here's Ed Faust, the innocent freshman, in a class with a Jesuit who I'll call Father Exegesis, okay? Because it was a class in biblical exegesis. Now, this Jesuit, he was an older man. He was a juiceless, humorless, just, at the point of just doing his teaching just by rote, never showed a drip of emotion. And he would just plow through his class. And one day, he said, I'm quoting directly now, God reveals himself to people in different places and at different times in different ways. The meaning of revelation is conditioned by particular history and culture, close quote. And 18-year-old Ed said, what was that? Now, if my dear sisters, then my teaching nuns taught me anything, it is the truth is the Catholic truth does not change. Catholic truth does not change, and that the Catholic faith is above time and culture and not conditioned by it. So in order to find out what was going on, he went to the university library, and he happened upon Pope St. Pius X's condemnations of modernism. He reads the condemned error in Pascendi. This is an error that condemned by Pius X. Christ did not teach a determined body of doctrine applicable to all times and all men, but rather inaugurated a religious movement adapted to or to be adapted to different times and places. Condemned proposition. Well, that sounds a lot like Father Exegesis. Then he reads number 62. The chief articles of the Apostles' Creed did not have the same sense for the Christians of the first age as they have for the Christians of our times. Condemned proposition. But it sounds just like what Father Exegesis taught me. Then he reads the oath against modernism, where the priest swears. Now, Father Exegesis would have taken this oath. Says, I firmly hold then, and I hold to my dying breath, the belief of the fathers in the charism of truth, which certainly is, was, and always will be in the succession of the episcopacy from the apostles. The purpose of this, then, not that dogma may be tailored according to what seems better and more suited to the culture of each age, but rather that the absolute and immutable truth preached by the apostles from the beginning may never be believed to be different, may never be understood in any other way. Close quote. Truth does not change. Yeah, but that sounds a lot what Father Exegesis said. But he couldn't have. It's a condemned proposition. He's a Jesuit. There is no way that this Jesuit could be teaching me this. And he's, who am I? I mean, he's a linguist. He had 5 languages. He had all these PhDs. No, I must have misunderstood him. So the next following lecture, the priest would always say, what do we, does anybody have any questions from the previous class? No, Ed had never questioned a priest before in his life. Raised his hand. He said, Father, am I correct in understanding that in your last lecture, you said that revelation is meant to be understood in different ways by people of different times and cultures? Father Exegesis said, yes. So, well, Father, then, can you explain to me how that statement differs from the condemned propositions 59 and 62 in Lamentabili, Pius X, and how it can be reconciled with the last paragraph in the Oath Against Modernism? dead silence. And the priest's face starts to balloon and turn red and grim. And for the first time all year, this priest shows emotion. And he said to Ed, "Young man, if you have to ask that question, then I can only assume that you do not have the intelligence to be in my classroom. Don't like it, get out," which is what we've suffered. We all know that. Okay, and at the end of the year, his fellow students who dozed through the class and couldn't care less, they all got A's. Ed got a punitive C from Father Exegesis, which prevented him from making the dean's list that year. Okay? Now, very interesting. This notion that truth can change over time. The truth is in a state of flux. The truth will change from age to age. This seems to be a perennial error of man. I think it's a lunatic proposition myself, but it seems to be a perennial problem. You go back to the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, 2,500 years ago, prior to Aristotle. He believed that everything was in a state of flux. Nothing was permanent. You never put your same foot in the same river twice, man, because it's always moving. And life is the same way, okay? Aristotle, Aquinas, they kind of put a damper on it, but it's popping up again as the philosophy, the true teaching of philosophy starts to break down. We end up with Hegel saying that everything's changing, thesis, antithesis, new synthesis. Cornelia Ferrara could talk about that at length. And then, of course, Marx. Everything is in a state of flux. And it invades theology. It invaded theology through what is called modernism. Pope St. Pius X said of the modernists, quote, "They pervert the eternal concept of truth." And he condemned modernism, 1907, Pascendi, and 1907 also, the Syllabus of Errors. Condemned proposition number 58, truth is no more immutable than man himself, since it evolved with him, in him, and through him. Okay, condemning the notion that truth can change. 1910, the oath against modernism. 3 years later, he comes back to it and condemns the notion that truth changes over time. And you take an oath, the priest takes an oath vowing before God with his hand on the Bible that he will accept the Catholic faith in the same meaning and in the same explanation as what the Church always taught. And after these condemnations of modernism, someone congratulated St. Pius X for stamping out modernism. And Pius X said, "Oh no, I have not killed this beast. I have only driven it underground. And if my successors are not vigilant, it will return in the future with an even greater menace than now." Okay? The problem did not go away. This is part of our Catholic teaching that we're usually not taught. The popes in the early part of the 20th century have to condemn again and again and again this notion that truth changes. December 1st, 1924, condemnation of the Holy Office, a condemned proposition. Now, it's kind of long, it's kind of philosophical, but stick with it because I'll try to give you a one-sentence summary afterwards. But it condemned the proposition, quote, "Truth is not found in any particular act of the intellect wherein conformity with the object would be had, as the scholastics say, but rather truth is always in a state of becoming and consists in a progressive alignment of understanding with life, namely a certain perpetual process by which the intellect strives to develop and explain that which experience presents or action requires, by which principle, moreover, as in all progression, nothing is ever determined or fixed." Close quote. Now, it's pretty much going after a philosopher named Maurice Blondel, a modernist philosopher. I'm not going to go into it. But again, you see, the problem is this idea that truth changes over time. Nothing is permanent. We get into the 1940s. This problem has not gone away. The popes are still warning against it. Famous speech by 1946 by Pope Pius XII to Jesuits, warning against something called the new theology, which is kind of a resurgence of modernism in a little bit of different packaging. Pius XII, here's what he's condemning. He says, there is a good bit of talk, but without the necessary clarity of concept, about a new theology, which must be in constant transformation, following the examples of all other things in the world which are in a constant state of flux and movement, without ever reaching their term. If we were to accept such an opinion, he says, what would become of the unchangeable dogmas of the Catholic faith, and what would become of the unity and stability of that faith? Close quote. Now that's a rhetorical question. He's not really asking, wow, what do you think is going to happen? He's telling us the unity of the faith will be destroyed. The stability of the faith will be destroyed. Now, what was Pius XII what was he reacting against? He was reacting against the proponents of what is called the new theology. This has exact reference to us. Everything I'm talking about here are not potential dangers. They're real dangers we face now, real problems we face now. And we're dealing with the same people. Because who were the advocates of the new theology that he was speaking against? Names like Father Henri de Lubac, Father Dominic Chenu, Father Hans Urs von Balthasar, Father Yves Congar, Father Henri Bouliard, Father Karl Rahner. Okay, these were all the great luminaries, as it were, of the new theology. New theology can be easily summed up in three basic, simple points, really. I'm going to give you a whole talk on this, but I just want to sum it up in three. First, it is the belief in a new, it is working towards a new synthesis between the Greek fathers and modern philosophies. Now, the problem with that great theologians like Arrigula-Grange and Father Greenstock saw at the time, is that the modern philosophies are based on agnosticism and skepticism and really cannot be baptized. Arrigula-Grange says, if you want to baptize something, first thing it has to be baptizable. Okay, it's not baptizable and it's going to cause confusion, which it has. Second, breaking down the distinction between the natural and supernatural orders. That's the second point of the new theology. And third, and here's the key point that ties in with what I've been saying already, the belief that theology must keep changing and adapting itself to the changing circumstances from age to age. Father Henri Bouliard, French Jesuit, he said in 1946, he said, a theology that is not current, I'm quoting directly, a theology that is not current, in other words, that does not keep changing, will be a false philosophy. Okay. Now, it's this basic tenet, the belief in some transformation of the dogmatic message of the Church over the course of the centuries. Onward to the Second Vatican Council. What do we have? Well, first of all of a sudden, there's no more warnings against change. And secondly, what is the Second Vatican Council, of course, but the Council of Revolutionary Change. His Honor, Barack Hussein Obama, even recognizes that. He praises John the 23rd for his institution of revolution. That happened in April. He made that change. And of course, the theologians, who were the main proponents of the new theology, became the main drafters and theologians of the Second Vatican Council. The same names I mentioned earlier. Henri de Lubac, Karl Rahner, Yves Congar, Dominic Chenu, and their disciples, two men named Joseph Ratzinger and Archbishop Karl Wojtyla. They were all part of this new theology. Father Enrici, a Jesuit, he told 30 Days Magazine in 1991 that the new theology became, quote unquote, the official theology of Vatican II. The new theology triumphed at the council, and we saw it was a council of change. Now, we're not going to look at Vatican II in a lot of depth, okay, but I just want to make some pointers so that you understand what I'm saying. First of all, we have this new orientation that came out of the council in our dealing with members of false religions, Protestants. We no longer try, in the new ecumenical spirit, we no longer try to convert non-Catholics, but the new program is one of convergence with non-Catholics, okay? We quote-unquote dialogue with the world rather than manfully fight the enemies of the world. And high churchmen call Vatican II a counter-syllabus. And they say that in praise of the council. Now, the great syllabus of errors of 1864 was condemning the principles that were coming out of the French Revolution that were making their way into society. And the condemnations of the Pius IX, well, it's not something that he just dreamed up on the spot because it might be nifty or useful, but everything in the syllabus is based on the perennial, immutable teaching of the Church. Yves Congar says, without compunction and in praise, Vatican II is a counter-syllabus. Cardinal Ratzinger said in praise of the Council, Vatican II is a counter-syllabus. What the Church taught in the 19th century is not going to be the same as what the Church teaches in the 20th century. Okay, we're right back to change. This is a tremendous problem that we face. Father Joseph Ratzinger, in his 1966 book, Theological Highlights of Vatican II, he just comes right out and says that Lumen Gentium gave us a new program. I'm going to quote him directly. He says, a basic unity of churches that remain churches yet become one church must replace the idea of conversion, even though conversion retains its meaningfulness for those in conscience motivated to seek it. Conversion is nice, but convergence is going to replace conversion. He uses the term replace. You can read it on page 73 of his book. Now, Father Joseph Ratzinger was a co-worker of Karl Rahner, one of the main drafters of Vatican II. He is in a position to tell us what was in the mind and what was the intention of these drafters, and he is telling us that this is the new program. And a man who understands this very well is Cardinal Walter Kasper. I like Cardinal Kasper. I really do. Because he says openly what many, many believe but won't say openly. He just lays it out. We changed everything. He says here, today we no longer understand ecumenism in the sense of return by which others would be converted and return to being Catholic. This was expressly abandoned at Vatican II, close quote. He understands the documents. So, of the 5 deadly errors that I was going to be talking about, this is the first. The idea that truth can change over time. The idea that there can be some transformation of the dogmatic message of the Church over the course of the centuries. Okay? Change, the primary error of our age. Very interesting. How many remember Monsignor Smith from Dunwoody Seminary? Anybody remember him? He said something years ago. He said most of the problems in theology are ultimately basic errors in philosophy, a twisted manner of thinking. Father Garrigou-Lagrange in 1946, he said, quote, the current crisis in the Church has not been a crisis of faith, but rather of a grave malady of intellect, close quote. This is twisted thinking. Truth can change over time. There's no such thing as a permanent truth, and I am telling you that as a permanent truth. Okay? It's self-contradictory from the beginning. Now, it's ultimately what we're looking at is a grave malady of intellect. So the other 4 points I want to talk about as far as modern dangers, the way I've structured this is these other 4 are what make change possible. Very rarely do you hear a Cardinal Kasper, someone like just saying, we've changed everything. It's usually much more subtle, or I'll use the term that Pius X used about modernists, much more cunning than that, okay? But these are the 4 other principles that make change possible. There's actually more, but I only had time to do these 4 here. But before I do that, actually, I want to demonstrate that truth cannot change. Now, when I give the catechism workshop here, I'm going to talk about the fact that when we defend a point of the faith, we have to do it using the 3 foundational points. We have to be able to prove it from Scripture. We have to be able to prove it from tradition, what the Church always taught. and from reason. Very rarely do we get reason and we end up in a kind of fideism, okay? Scripture, tradition, and reason. So I'm going to demonstrate this operation by using these three principles to show that truth cannot change. First of all, from Scripture. We know from Hebrews 13:8, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Okay, no change. Galatians 1:8, but though we or an angel from heaven preach a gospel to you besides that which we have preached to you, let him be anathema. Okay, no change in doctrine. Then tradition, what the church has always taught. The church taught the common sense principle that truth doesn't change. Pope St. Agatho, who died in 681. I'd give a lot to hear this coming from the Vatican now. But here's what Pope St. Agatho said. Quote, nothing of the appointed things ought to be diminished, nothing changed, nothing added, but they must be preserved both as regard expression and meaning. Close quote. The same meaning, the same expression. Okay, Pope St. Agatho. He's echoing St. Vincent of Lerins, who said that same thing in the 4th century. We have Vatican I teaching de fide. Let therefore the understanding of the knowledge and the wisdom of individual men and of all men and the entire church grow and advance greatly and powerfully over the course of the years. So there is an advance in understanding, but it's laid out here, but always in its own class, in the same dogma, in the same meaning, and in the same explanation. Okay, dogmatically taught de fide at Vatican I. Oath against modernism, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I don't want to take too much time on this, but the oath against modernism saying that he swears, the priest swears, that he will always accept and teach the faith in the same meaning and in the same explanation. Okay, that's directly from the oath against modernism. So that's Scripture, tradition, and reason. The argument from reason we can find in the Crown Prince of Reason, G.K. Chesterton. Here's what G.K. Chesterton said in Orthodoxy in 1927, I think he wrote that book, 1924. He says, an imbecile habit has arisen in the modern controversy of saying that such and such a creed can be held in one age, but cannot be held in another. Some dogma, we are told, was credible in the 12th century, but it's not credible in the 20th century. You might as well say that a certain philosophy can be believed on Mondays, but it cannot be believed on Tuesdays. Okay? Just, it's unreasonable. It flies in the face of reason. So then again, so how does this change take place? Well, in the context of the 5 deadly errors, I'm going to give you the other 4 that make change possible. As I said, there's more than this, so I had time for. So the first is that the belief that truth can change over time. Next, and I'll be explaining all these, so if they sound a little weird, just wait. The second is the elevation of the secondary over the primary. This is a brilliant strategy. Third, significant silence. Fourth, pretend the magisterium has not spoken on certain issues. And 5, what I call ecclesiastical legal positivism. Now, all this is very easy to understand once I start making my way through it. Now, the elevation of the secondary over primary. What do I mean by that? Well, those that should be in a hierarchy of order, primary and secondary, that gets reversed. And I can explain it in the secular order when we want to talk about a doctor. Okay? Now, what is a doctor? A doctor, his primary function is what? Is to heal. His secondary obligation is to have compassion. All right? He has to have compassion. Nobody wants to go to a doctor who says to you, I got the x-rays, you're riddled with cancer, too bad. Lots of people have to deal with it. Now you do. I'll do what I can to make you more comfortable, but that's it. Okay? Not a shred of compassion. All right? You have to have both. But what, though, do we think of a doctor who said, gosh, I just examined John Smith. Oh, man, he's 43 years old. He's got 7 children. he has leukemia. I don't want to tell him. If I tell him, he's really going to be upset, his family's going to be upset, and they're going to be all undone. And so I don't want to upset him. I want to have compassion and not tell him, okay? That is elevating the secondary over the primary and then defeating his primary purpose in the process. This is what's been done in the church. It's been done in the church. First, elevation of the secondary over the primary. And that is, I'm going to be talking about the way the documents of the Second Vatican Council were written. Now, I told you before, well, I didn't tell you before, but I'll tell you now. A key point of modernism is they hate the philosophy and theology of St. Thomas Aquinas. Why? Because this is called scholasticism, okay? And this scholasticism is the precision of philosophical and theological language really hammered into place by St. Thomas Aquinas, probably the greatest genius the church ever had, elevated by the popes. Council of Trent put the Summa Theologica on the altar next to the Bible to show the pride of place. But very precise language. You can't monkey with the language. You can't have ambiguity. Everything is precise. Modernists hate scholasticism because they live in a climate of ambiguity. Because they're cunning. Okay? The proponents of the new theology, Henri de Lubac, von Balthasar, they spit blood when you mention scholasticism. They hate it. It's in their books. Read it. They hate it. They'll give some lip service to St. Thomas Aquinas, but basically they hate scholasticism. Okay. We get to the Second Vatican Council. Prior councils, everything is in precise scholastic language. Council of Trent, there's only one way to interpret it. Vatican I, there's only one way to interpret it. No. We have to have pastoral language. We can't have this dry, static scholasticism that nobody understands. People understand it, believe me. I teach my children scholasticism, okay? People understand it. People can understand it, right? They purposely did not put the documents in scholastic language, but in this more ambiguous language that they call pastoral language. Now, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, he was on the Semper Preparatory Commission, and he saw this happening, and he recognized it to be a problem. And prior to Vatican II, he said in a major meeting, look, if you're going to have your pastoral language, I guess I can't stop you, but here's what I propose. We should have a second set of Vatican II documents written in the precision of scholastic philosophy, the precision of scholastic language, and that precise theological documents for the theologians will serve as the official interpreter of the pastoral language. And he was shot down by the progressives. He tried to head off this whole problem with the hermeneutic of continuity and the hermeneutic of rupture and the hermeneutic of the hermeneutic. I mean, he tried to head all that off. He saw it happening, right? Shot down because they want to live in this climate of ambiguity. Now, in case anybody is nervous about, because he's talking about Vatican II, a couple points you have to remember about Vatican II. The first of all is, during the council itself, someone asked Cardinal Felici, who was I forget the position, but he was, say, the Secretary General of the Council, very high position. He was kind of the theologian. And someone asked him for the theological note, what's the weight of these documents? How do we judge them? Here's how he responded. He said, we have to distinguish, according to the schemas in the chapters, those that have been already the subject of dogmatic definitions in the past. So we accept them. As for the declarations that have a novel character, he said, we have to make reservations. He's telling us the council documents themselves will demand us to make reservations. We just can't accept them point blank. And then, again, I love Cardinal Casper. Cardinal Casper, he said in April 12th, 2013, he just come out and said it. Well, we've been saying for years, and we get shot down for saying it. He said it openly in the Observatore Romano, the Vatican's official newspaper. He said in many places the Council Fathers had to find compromised formulas in which often the positions of the majority are located immediately next to the minority. That means the opposite position, all right? Designed to delimit them. Thus, the conciliar texts themselves have a huge potential for conflict and open the door to a selective reception in either direction. This is a terrific admission. It's a terrible thing to happen, but I'm glad he admitted it. I'm glad he admitted it. You know, authority, respect for authority is a two-way street. We have to have respect for authority, but the authorities have to give us something to respect. And when you have documents that are openly compromised formulas, then this is where what we're getting is flawed documents. But we're talking in terms of the elevation of the secondary over the primary, okay? This so-called pastoral language took primacy over the duty of precision of language, and the confusion is running rampant to this day. We also have this we see in Vatican II's approach to marriage, where it effectively, on one hand, talked about the children being they don't even say primary purpose. They just say it's the first blessing. But then, well, I should explain first in case people don't know. The Catholic Church has always taught that the primary purpose of marriage is the begetting and the education of children, and these children must be educated as members of Christ in sanctifying grace and in the faith. The secondary purpose of marriage is the mutual love and assistance of the two spouses. Now, they are sandwiched right up against one another, but the primary purpose of marriage, Father Paul Wickens used to say, marriage is God's way of filling heaven. Very simple. Primary purpose of marriage, the begetting of education of children. Secondary, mutual love. Okay, what Vatican II did, it by saying that the other ends are not of less value. And let me get the terminology so I'm not accused of. Hence, while not making the other purposes of less account, the true practice of conjugal love and the whole meaning of the family life results from it have this aim. Okay, so when you say it's not of less account, you've equalized them. Now, Father Dominic Chenu, we met him before. He's a proponent of new theology. He said it was our aim as council drafters to reverse this teaching, to put love as primary over procreation of children. Something significant took place when in the text on the family at Gaudium et Spes was written. As you know, the traditional thesis pretends, he rejects it, that the primary end of marriage is reproduction, with secondarily some pleasures. He's misrepresenting it. It's mutual love. The council text, however, gave priority to love between the spouses, not to exclude procreation, because it only, but the point is, he says, the change in terminology was the work of the professionals in the field. They changed the terminology, okay? So you have the elevation of the secondary over the primary. Now, all of a sudden, if love is the primary purpose of marriage, well, now we know why all of a sudden after Vatican II they start talking, well, maybe we'll change the teaching on birth control. If love is primary, this goes right through, I hate to say it, to homosexuality. If love is primary. You reverse those, it destroys everything. Okay? The elevation of the secondary over the primary. The present crisis we're going through right now with this idea, this push that divorced and remarried people can now receive the Eucharist. Cardinal Casper is openly for that. A number of prelates are for that, some even higher, which is very scary. What do we have? We have the elevation of the secondary over the primary. We want to stress compassion, like that doctor did not want to tell the man riddled with leukemia that he had leukemia. The emphasis of compassion. Okay, now, it's very interesting. Why is this so effective, this elevation of the secondary over primary? Can anybody take a guess? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Why is this so effective? Why is it so brilliant? Because it all still sounds Catholic. Mutual love between spouses sounds Catholic. Reaching out to non-Catholics within the modern ecumenical approach that says we don't have to convert, sounds Catholic. The secondary over the primary. Compassion for the divorced and remarried, let them receive communion. Sounds Catholic, compassion. The elevation that all of a sudden now there's this care of the poor and the downtrodden, which is Catholic, but the primary teaching of the popes of the past, that Brian McCall writes about very well, are undermined. So now you have churchmen calling for government-mandated redistribution of wealth, which is socialism, which, in my catechism, is a sin against the seventh commandment, thou shalt not steal. Okay? So this elevation of the secondary over the primary is really rather a brilliant strategy of subversion because it all sounds Catholic in the process, and that's why so many people are hoodwinked. Okay, I have to move on. Third, significant silence. Again, this is huge, very big. Central points of Catholic doctrine that need to be said, need to be written, need to be taught, just not talked about. Okay? The failure to affirm leaves the door open to head down another direction. Again, Vatican II is our example here. 1928, Pope Pius XI condemned ecumenism. He condemned Catholics getting involved because, first of all, you're equating the true religion and the false religion. Second, you're giving witness to the members of false religion that they are on a legitimate path to God. And third, it's a false sense of unity because, as Pius XI taught, there is only one way of Christian unity, and that is a return of non-Catholics to the true church. He said that in 1929 in a major encyclical against ecumenism. Okay? Pope Pius XII in 1949 said the same thing in his warning against ecumenism. Said the same thing. Unity can only arise from the return of non-Catholics to the one true church. Along comes Vatican II, the decree on ecumenism. Guess what? The two major papal documents dealing with ecumenism are not quoted, not mentioned, not even footnoted. Significant silence. And I'll tell you who notices this right away is the Protestants. I read Dr. Robert McCarthy Brown, pretty smart, Lutheran. He was a Protestant observer at Vatican II. He's very liberal. But he is uncorking his best champagne over Vatican II's decree on ecumenism because of what it doesn't say. I'm quoting his book. Document on Ecumenism makes clear how new is the attitude that has emerged. No more is there talk of schismatic and heretics, but rather of separated brethren. No more is there imperial demand that the dissidents return in penitence to the church who has no need of penitence. Instead, there is a recognition that both sides are guilty of the sins of division and must reach out penitentially to one another. Open parentheses, that's why we need an apology program. Close parentheses. No more are Protestants dismissed merely as sects, S-E-C-T-S, or psychological entities. Instead, it is acknowledged that there is a measure of ecclesial reality to be found within their corporate life. He is rejoicing that nowhere in Vatican II does it say what Mortalium Animus and Pius XII said, that there's only one way for unity, and that is a return of non-Catholics to the Catholic Church. He sees that it's not there, and he's rejoicing over it as a great step forward. We see something similar in the document Nostra Aetate, the section that deals with the members of the synagogue. Okay? Once again, significant silence. No mention of the need for Jews to convert for salvation. At the time of the council, there was a rabbi, Rabbi Abraham Herschel. He praised Nostra Aetate for this reason. He said, quote, "The schema on the Jews is the first statement in church history devoid of any expression of hope for conversion." See, he's happy about that because of this silence. And yet in the original schema, because you know that there was the various schemas that were written that led up to the final document, the original schema did have a very gentle call for conversion. Here's what was in the original schema. Quote, "It is worth remembering that the union of the Jewish people with the church is part of the Christian hope. Therefore, following the teachings of the apostles, the church waits with unshakable faith and deep longing for the entry of that people into the fullness of the people of God established by Christ." Okay? That was considered too much by the liberal theologians and the people that they were dealing with and the rabbis they were dialoguing with at the time, and it was jettisoned. Significant silence. Okay? Now, we all know in natural life how deadly significant silence can be. Husband and a wife. The wife starts to notice. The wife has that sixth sense that wives have. She notices something not quite right. And one day she says to her husband, "Honey, do you love me?" "Well, we've been married for 15 years. "Yes, but honey, do you love me?" "Well, we have 3 strapping children, and they're a happy offspring to have around, and they're a lot of fun." "Yes, but honey, do you love me?" "Well, we got this nice house, and we've been on vacation in Hawaii." "Yes, but honey, he will not affirm." And the failure to affirm means everything. The failure to affirm and the refusal to affirm is equal to a denial of reaffirming. So this is what we've got. And with, say, the Vatican II document Nostra Aetasta, what do we have Cardinal Koch saying? He says we have a fundamental realignment of the church, a fundamental reorientation. I think Sister Lucy called it a diabolic disorientation, away from the notion that non-Catholics have to convert. Okay? Crucial omission, significant silence. Now, here's another aspect of significant silence that you've all noticed. And I noticed it as when I was in Catholic high school. And that is the failure of churchmen to use the term mortal sin. When was if you're still going to your parishes, when was the last time you heard it? When was the last time you heard it from the bishops? You never hear it. Well, maybe they'll use it against traditionalists, but beyond that. but okay, significant silence. That's what told me. I was in high school from 1972 to 1976. And I wasn't particularly pious back then. I was playing rock music. I was having a great time. Okay? I was still good, but I was playing rock music. But there's only one reason I went to Mass, and that's because it's a mortal sin if you miss. And if you die in the state of mortal sin, you go to hell forever. It's not worth it. I'll go to Mass. That's what kept me right when I was in high school. But 72 to 76, surrounded by priests, I won't tell you which order, but it was the spirit of the time, no mention of mortal sin unless to deny it. Oh, that's not a sin. That's not a sin. That's not a sin. God doesn't care about that. Okay? Now, imagine the difference there would be today if the priests and bishops, and even higher, did not give in to pressure and continue to remind us nonstop about mortal sin and the need to go to confession. Reminding that contraception is a mortal sin. Every single act of contraception is a mortal sin and sends the soul to hell forever. That fornication, the marital act between 2 unmarried people, mortal sin, sends the soul to hell forever. The homosexual act, even one, not only a mortal sin, but a sin against nature itself. That a Catholic politician that supports abortion or same-sex marriage is a public sinner and must be denied communion. Okay? If they did that, we would have sin, but we would never have the rampant promiscuity we have now. We wouldn't have the militant rainbow lobby shoving same-sex marriage and worse down our throat. The next big thing is transgender. Take a look at this week's Time magazine. Transgender rights. There was a song from the 70s called, Yet They Call Him the Freak. Right? We're in the age of the freak, is what's happening. Catholic politician who supports abortion. If the bishops did their job of calling out sin, Joe Biden, John Kerry would be in public disgrace, as they deserve. Right? Nancy Pelosi Nancy Pelosi, Kathleen Sebelius would be in public disgrace. Significant silence. And what happens when the churchmen do talk, say about sins against morality, they say it's not in accord with the dignity of the human person. You're not really respecting the other's human dignity. Well, I know a lot of young people involved in that type of activities, and they say we're perfectly dignified. Leave us alone. Human dignity is a very subjective term. Okay? So, again, dogma, crucial dogma and sin are not always denied. They're just not talked about. So, I don't know where I am time-wise. I have to jump to the next thing. There's a long quote from Pius XII I want to read where he talks about the first duty of the Pope is to teach the truth and condemn error. There's an absolute duty. It's in the beginning. It's how he opens Pascendi. And if we don't do that, if we keep silent, I'm quoting now, we will fail in our most sacred duty. Okay, there is the duty, and we have to pray for our leaders. Number 4, very quickly, pretend the magisterium of the church has not spoken. Okay, I think we see it. We can gauge that already. There is the ex cathedra. The church is defined 3 times. It's a very unpopular doctrine right now. Defined 3 times that there is no salvation outside the Catholic Church. The most holy Roman Church, the Council of Florence says, firmly believes, professes, and preaches that none of those existing outside the Catholic Church, not only pagans, but also Jews, heretics, and schismatics, can ever be partakers of eternal life, but shall go into the eternal fire which was prepared for the devil and his angels. No one, let his almsgiving be as great as it may, no one, even if he pour out his blood for the name of Christ, can be saved, unless he abide within the bosom and the unity of the Catholic Church. Okay, this is the immutable, unchanging teaching. What do they do today? Just pretend the magisterium is not spoken. In the new ecumenical approach, the new spirit of Assisi, just pretend the magisterium hasn't spoken. The new approach with Nostra Aetate, pretend it hasn't spoken. And the example I already gave you, in Vatican II's decree on ecumenism, the 2 major papal documents against ecumenism, not mentioned, not footnoted. Okay, pretend it hasn't spoken. Now this 5th one is, it's what I call ecclesiastical legal positivism. Whatever is written down, that's the law, that's it, end of story. Okay? Legal positivism is what gives us abortion. And in most people's minds, if it's legal, then it's moral. Okay? But the principles of the 4 points of a true law, there are 4 components that have to be there when you make a true law. It has to be a principle of reason. This comes from Aquinas in our traditional patrimony of Catholic moral theology. A principle of reason for the common good promulgated by legitimate authority. If any one of those points are missing, you will have the appearance of law, but you will not have a law. Leo XIII talks about that. These are not even true laws. The abortion law is not a law. The same-sex law is not a law. And even within the church, when things are passed that are contrary to what the church taught and practiced through the ages, they are not really true laws, not really legitimate Catholic tenets or practices. Now, in normal times, when the hierarchy speaks, we just listen and obey, when we don't have a crisis of faith. But now what do we have, as Sister Lucy says, and everybody knows, a diabolic disorientation of the upper hierarchy. We have Cardinal Chappie, I don't know if Father Gruner might have mentioned this last night, of him saying that in the 3rd secret, we are told, amongst other things, that the great apostasy in the church begins at the top. Okay? And a lot of the problems come with this idea that whatever the Vatican says at the moment is okay, then it's okay. Let's start with communion in the hand. Okay, communion in the hand in the objective order is a sacrilege. St. Thomas Aquinas says only that which is consecrated should touch that which is consecrated. And the priest's hands are consecrated in order to touch the host. And of those of you who go to the old Latin Mass, what you'll notice is that when the priest first consecrates the host, what about these? What happens to these? They stay together. They stay together through the rest of the Mass, even when he opens the tabernacle or lifts the chalice or does anything, these two are together. Why? For the sake of preventing desecration, because even the smallest, tiniest particle of the host is still the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, and that is defined by the Council of Trent. And these rubrics enshrine that doctrine. Okay? And then, with communion in the hand, what do we have? Oh, of course, then they're washed after he distributes communion, and then that is washed and consumed. You're not allowed to, if you're an altar boy, well, I mean, you don't pour it down the drain, but the priest prevents that anyway because he consumes it during Mass. But the thing is, you have all these rubrics for centuries just blown away, because now we say you can hand it out in the hand, you can give it in the hand, you can be a Eucharistic minister, all these things. The new Mass itself, those rubrics are not even suggested. Okay? Does that make it right? No, this is a deficiency. But most people will just say, well, this is what's approved, this is what's allowed, this is what we do, end of story. Okay? No, law has to be according to the nature of things. And the church, things are not true because the church teaches them. The church teaches them because they're true. And when that order is reversed, then we run into a lot of problems. The Pope himself are absolutely bound to adhere to the faith. Vatican I taught this, in case you've never heard it, that not even a pope may preach a new doctrine. Defining papal infallibility, and especially the limits of infallibility, Vatican I taught de fide, the Holy Spirit was not promised to the successor of Peter, that by the revelation of the Holy Spirit they might disclose new doctrine, but that by his help they may guard sacredly the revelation transmitted through the apostles and the deposit of faith, and might faithfully set it forth. And I don't know if you've ever heard of a theologian named Father Joseph de Saint Marie, Carmelite theologian, loyal son of Pope John Paul II. He helped Pope John Paul II write the consecration of the world for 1982. He helped him write that. But even he warned that we are in a present crisis of faith, and we have to look with reservations of what our highest officials act. Here's what he said. He said, in our day, he's very gentlemanly, in our day, and it's one of the most obvious signs of the extraordinarily abnormal character of the current state of the Church, it is very often the case that the acts of the Holy See demand of us prudence and discernment. Close quote. So he's telling us in a very elevated, theological, gentlemanly way that we pass through an extraordinary period. He calls it abnormal. And what does he give us as the key to surviving this abnormality? He doesn't say, whatever the Pope says, that's what you follow and you're all set. No. He says the opposite. Aligning himself with the traditional teaching of the popes, the saints, Pope Innocent III, St. Robert Bellarmine, Father Joseph St. Marie says that we have to exercise prudence and discernment when it comes to the actions of the Holy See itself today. And that means papal actions. And he doesn't say we do this now and then. He says it is very often the case in our present state of things. Okay? Now, this idea of ecclesiastical positive, whatever the leaders say, makes it true. This has a direct implication, of course, to the message of Fatima. 1982, Pope John Paul II consecrated to the world of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I'm grateful that he did that. 1984, he consecrated the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I'm very happy he did that. We know that there were blessings given to the world because of this. But our Blessed Mother did ask for the consecration of Russia. I know it's a two-syllable word, but I think they can handle it. Russia. Okay, 2 syllables. Consecration of Russia. And that it be done in union with all the bishops in the world, in their own cathedral, or it could be done at the Vatican. It could have been done at Vatican II if they wanted. Okay? That has not been done. But what happens? Somebody in the Vatican says, it's been done. Ecclesiastical, legal, positive. We say so. Even though what they say does not conform to what Our Lady said, does not conform to the directives Our Lady gave, does not conform to reality, and also there is the promise of what Our Lady said for the conversion of Russia and a period of peace granted to the world, and that's not here either. But no, we say this ultimately is an abuse of authority. So, final point. Why is it necessary that we resist, especially this notion that truth can change over time and all the other points? Well, first of all, what are the dangers? Well, first of all, it emboldens the modernists. I have a book by Father Richard McBrien. Okay. Galloping modernist. Never met a church teacher and he didn't want to criticize. Okay. I mean, galloping modernist. In his book, 1973, The Remaking of the Church, he is celebrating the advances that were done at Vatican II. And what does he say? Now we have to push for more change. Now we have to push for more. The religious liberty, the approval of religious liberty was unthinkable prior to the council. We kept the pressure up. We got it. Vernacular in the liturgy, unthinkable before the council. We kept the pressure up. We got it. Ecumenism, the type of ecumenism practiced since Vatican II, unthinkable prior to Vatican II. We pushed for it. We got it. And now we just push for more. That's what the We Are Church people are all about. That's what the Women's Ordination Conference is all about. They gave in before, under pressure. They're going to give in again. We are just in the vanguard. We are progress. We are the progressives. Okay? So it emboldens the modernists. Secondly, it perverts the eternal concept of truth. Truth has a value all to itself. We have to love the truth. Father Frederick Faber said, where there is no hatred of heresy, there is no holiness. And also, it puts truth, another danger is it puts truth on the skids. As Pius XII warned, the unity and the stability of the faith is fragmented, it's destroyed, but it also puts morality on the skids, because you end up with an effective denial of the universal, binding, immutable laws of morality, and there's a term for the denial of the universal, binding, immutable laws of morality, and that term is situation ethics. And that's where we end up. And what was the direction of the vanguard of modernist moral theologians after the council that initiated change? Situation ethics. Father Charles Curran, Father Richard McBrien, Father Richard McCormick, leading Jesuits, okay, all pushing situation ethics. There is no immutable, universal, binding law, universal, always binding, okay? Catholic doctrine, if we do not fight this and resist this, Catholic doctrine, as the modernists say, will be expected to change according to the trends of the age, from age to age. And what's destroyed in this? The hope and the reality that's observed by G.K. Chesterton when he said that the Catholic Church is the only thing that saves a man from the degrading slavery of becoming a child of his age. Modernism places the Church as a child of the age. Modernism places the Church that the Church and dogmatic teaching should be subservient to the trends of man and the trends of the times, and it thus gives its first allegiance not to the true God, but to the trends of man, and thus it is a form of idolatry, putting man in the place of God. The first commandment does not say, thou shalt not be an atheist. The first commandment says, thou shalt not have strange gods before me. And this subservient to the trends of man, and also we all know how public opinion can be manipulated, because we're living in the time of the masters of the manipulation of public opinion. And if you don't believe me too, just look back in the gospel, Palm Sunday, Hail, King of the Jews. Same people, Good Friday. We have no king but Caesar. Crucify him. Okay, this is what we're left with. So, again, I'm going to close. 5 deadly errors against the faith. The belief the truth can change over time. And the 4 points that support this and make it possible. The elevation of the secondary over the primary. 3rd, significant silence. 4th, pretend the magisterium has not spoken. And 5th, ecclesiastical legal positivism. Now, as I said, I've given you a lot of bad news. But the way, of course, to fight this is to learn the faith, and primarily from pre-Vatican II sources. Yeah, there are some good things that came out after the Council. Fatima Crusader, Catholic Family News. But there are good things. We have authors in this room, Brian McCall and Cornelia Ferrara. John Salz is going to be here. But if you really want the great textbooks, most of the time you have to go before the Council, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in my workshop. Actual, real textbooks and principles that we could use. So in closing, and this helps you and also helps you to help others, whether it's your children or your friends or your loved ones. Okay, so in closing, the fathers of the church have given us firm guidance in what to do in a time of crisis, and that is to maintain tradition. Here's what St. Vincent of Lerins said in the 4th century. He says, "What shall a Catholic do if some portion of the church detaches itself from the communion of the universal faith? What other choice can he make? If some new contagion attempts to poison not only a small part of the church, but the whole church at once, then his great concern will be to attach himself to antiquity, in other words, to tradition, which can no longer be led astray by any lying novelty." Thank you for your attention.